千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Without any further ado, let's tackle 23. Dao De Jing 23. Spare speech is natural. Thus, strong wind does not last all morning. Sudden rain does not last all day. What makes this so? Heaven and earth. Even heaven and earth cannot make it last. How can humans? Thus, those who follow the Tao are with the Tao. Those who follow virtue are with virtue. Those who follow laws are with laws. Those who are with the Tao is also pleased to have them. Those who are with virtue, virtue is also pleased to have them. Those who are with laws, laws is also pleased to have them. Those who do not trust sufficiently, others have no trust in them. Okay, so with this chapter, overall, I think this is definitely one of the chapters that requires more explanation to have a sort of emerge in crystal clarity. The way that the main ideas are expressed is not the same way that we would express them today. So it's going to have that inexplicably inscrutable flavor to it. Nevertheless, I think once it's properly explained, it will be very clear. But first, as usual, let's go ahead and do a sectional analysis to see if we can discover where the sections are. For this particular chapter, I think it's actually easier for us to start from the bottom up. So if you take a look at the bottom part in the Chinese characters, you should be able to easily make out the characters that are the same across different lines. So let me challenge everyone real quickly now. If you take a look at the Chinese characters toward the bottom, can you see the common repeating characters from one line to the next? And I'll pause a moment for everyone to take a look at the lower left-hand side of this particular slide. Pardon me for that interruption. That was a spam phone call that was just coming in. Okay, so back to our analysis. Definitely, everybody is noticing. So to start out with, I think everyone can see that 10, 11, 12, there's a couple of characters in common there. But that is not all. If you take another look at the same three lines, there's actually more. So first, what we can do is that we can block out those lines from 10 to 12. We can consider that to be a section. And then you can take a look at those 3 lines and uncover many more repeating characters. So we have enough to identify that as a section by itself. So that is our first step. Now, there's more. First of all, before we go any further, let me draw everyone's attention to the lines, to the 3 lines, 10, 11, and 12. So I'd like everyone to notice that the characters that are not repeating themselves, they themselves repeat. So what I mean is, in line 10, you can note that the 3rd character is exactly the same as the 5th character. And they're the character for the Tao. They appear in the upper right-hand corner as well. The same is true for line 11. You'll notice that the 3rd character there is the same as the 5th character. That's the character De, means virtue. And then lastly, there's a character Shi in line 12. That's also repeated in the 3rd and 5th position. So respectively, these are the characters for Tao, virtue, and loss. And this will become important later on. So keep that in mind and look a little bit above, and you will see the same characters repeating again, right above 10, 11, and 12. In 7, 8, 9, so let's start by taking a look at line 8 and line 9. I think it's pretty easy to see a whole bunch of characters there. And let me highlight them. So in fact, it's 3 characters that are repeating from 8 to 9. And then the first and last characters in 8, you'll notice that's the character for virtue. It's exactly the same as the repeating character in line 11. And in line 9, the first and last characters, Shi, that's the character for loss, exactly the same as what you have down in 12, in line 12. So with that being the case, it seems like it would also make sense to have the same thing for the character Tao. And indeed, that is true. So you have the same repeating characters there, and you have essentially the same structure toward the end of 7, as you can see. And then you have the last character there. That's the character for the Tao. And then there's a part of it in front, those who follow. So that's actually a repeating line as well. It's just that it's offset, so it's not as easy to see. But now, looking at 7, 8, 9, you see the same progression: Tao, virtue, loss. Then down in 10, 11, 12, same progression: Tao, virtue, loss. So now we can see, hopefully it's become obvious that this is another section by itself. Not only that, but we can now see that from 7 all the way down to the very end, it's actually about the same thing. That is, you have the repetition, Tao, virtue, loss, repeated again, Tao, virtue, loss, and then a final concluding line. So it will be more accurate to make it so that we have the section, we have the line between 9 and 10 to be a thinner, smaller line to depict that it's a subsection within within an overall section. And from just looking at this, it should become more obvious that we now have a top half and bottom half. So the chapter is divided into two halves, with the bottom half further subdivided into two sections that you can tell by looking at the structural similarities between lines, but they're all talking about the same thing. And that same thing being the progression from Tao to virtue to loss. And actually, and we can look at it in either order. Tao is the natural practice of the Tao. Virtue is how you get there by practicing virtues, and loss is if you don't practice at all. Then another way to look at it is from the bottom up, which is loss is where you are feeling disoriented and lost in life, having lost your sense of where you should be going in life. And then practicing virtues will get you eventually to the realm of the Tao, and that's the realm of purpose and meaning in your life. So let's take a look at the top half, because if the bottom half has two subsections, then perhaps the same is true for the top half. So there's not as many repeating characters in the top half, but we can actually identify two lines with repeating characters. A little harder to see because it's offset by one character. But let me show you and see what you think. Okay, so take a look at the characters 2 and 3. So lines 2 and 3, you've got two repeating characters. They're offset by one character, and that offsetting character is the first character in line 2, which is the character for thus, so, therefore. All right, so that pretty much informs us that we can also have a subdivision in the top half. So now the structure of this entire chapter becomes revealed, the hidden structure. It's 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, and then conclusion. That's what this really looks like. So if you prefer, you can also have a thin line between line 12 and 13. But I think it's clear. So I think we're now ready to do the line by line, to start digging into what this means. Let's start with line 1. And let's focus on the meaning, because later on we're gonna, for some lines we will do the characters, we'll do the pinyin and the meaning and so forth. But for now though, let's focus on the meaning. It's especially important in the first section. So sages observe nature and note that everything that occurs has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That nature is composed of many processes that are happening all the time. They're happening simultaneously, but no matter when they happen, there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. So everything comes to a stop at some point. So let's continue on. This is about the material world. No manifestation continues on forever. All things start, stop, and transition. So that's, if you think about it, that's very true. It's not just, this is beyond the observation that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is actually taking it one step further and observing that there's the starting, the stopping, but then there's also the transformation. So if you burn wood, it'll have a beginning, the burning process. The manifestation of the flames will have a start, a beginning. at some point it will all be done, so it will the flames will die down. Now there's a transition to something else, that is the logs have been burned to a crisp, leaving only ashes behind. So the light and heat that it generated have now transitioned to something else. And perhaps the burnt wood will become fertilizer for the next generation of plants. So continuing transformation, and that too will have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So this applies to all of nature. Now, specifically in Daojing 23, this is being applied to observations of weather, specifically wind and rain. So the overall idea is that since everything has that starting and stopping characteristic, then what that means, what that suggests, is that we human beings should observe and learn by emulating nature. So specifically, this is referring to communication. That is, when nature exhibits weather phenomena, it is as if nature is speaking. Nature is communicating. So the rain, the wind, that is like nature talking. But that doesn't last forever. So we human beings should also communicate with that in mind, and therefore we should never talk nonstop. And we should actually even limit ourselves so we're not long-winded. So that's the beginning part, and this idea deserves to be explained more fully. So the idea so far is that one should express himself or herself fully but concisely. Make your point and come to a full stop, rather than to drag in a whole bunch of other things. Now, if you observe the way that people communicate, you quickly see that some people have this down. It's a natural part of them. They don't talk that much, but what they say is treated with importance because what they talk about is to the point. They expressed what needs to be expressed, and then that's it. They don't need to belabor the point. They don't need to keep repeating themselves. While other people keep talking like a broken record, they continue to repeat themselves. And sometimes there are variations in what they say, but it's always about the same thing. So Laozi is definitely saying that we should seek to communicate like nature. Now, let's dig into the metaphors of wind and rain to understand what he's saying. So what I want to do is to first focus on 飘风. So this expression means strong wind. Separately, the characters are a little bit different. So let me bring up the pinyin first, 飘风, and then I'll bring in the surface meaning, powerful wind, whirlwind, cyclone, hurricane level winds. So strong winds, basically. Now, with these two characters, the second one, 风, you'll see the pinyin there, fang. That's what a native English speaker would sound it out, fang, but the actual original Mandarin is feng. So it's more like a U or O in there. So that just means wind. And that character is very commonly used in modern Mandarin. It's used all the time. And then 飘, the first one just means by itself, it means like, floating. So floating in the winds. That doesn't seem like strong wind, but in the ancient context, that's what it meant, powerful winds. And that character is no longer used in conjunction with the modern character for wind today. So no one would ever say 飘风 in modern Mandarin today. This is strictly an ancient expression. You might say in modern Mandarin, you might say 强风, strong wind. Okay, so what does it mean? The surface meaning, powerful winds, whirlwind, cyclone, etc. The deeper meaning, in this context, the term refers to forceful human communication. So this is very similar to the English expression blowing hot air. And that means being a blowhard, gas bag, or windbag. So what we can get out of this is that this is really talking about the kind of communication that Tao cultivators would like to minimize. So just like strong winds don't last all morning, we want to limit our blowing hot air, so to speak. Now, there are different levels to this. Let me explain. So when it comes to strong wind, 飘风, these strong winds can blow in varying strengths, just like we have a rating system for hurricanes. We measure the power of winds by noting the speed. The wind may, for instance, be blowing at 10 miles per hour, etc. So at the lowest level of strength, such winds are just normal everyday talk. So Tao cultivators would seek to minimize even on that, to engage in a lot of normal everyday talk. It can quickly become idle chatter that serves no particular purpose. So that it belongs to the same category as the other more extreme levels of winds, in that it's something that Tao cultivators would seek to cut short. All right, so what about a stronger level? Speaking empty words. Now, this, I think everyone knows that this is something that happens with a certain frequency in life. For instance, I myself have had a recent experience listening to someone who's presented as an expert in a technical field. So after listening to this gentleman for a while, because of my study of the Tao, I could see that this particular speaker was actually very limited in his understanding. How could I tell? Well, because he filled his talk with fluff, with empty words that carry little or no meaning. Let me be more specific. When he talked about technology and service providers, he would say things like, every service provider is different. Now, he would say it with such seriousness, that he's making a serious point. And yet, it's a point that doesn't need to be made. People were listening to the talk to find out about how service providers are different and what to watch out for. Those will be the insights that people are after. People don't need to go to such a talk to hear a pronouncement about how every service provider is different. We know that. We don't need to be told that. And this was repeated several times as if it's some kind of valuable insights. It is not. Then the gentleman will continue on and say things like, you're going to want to be careful in making your choice. Really? We're not going to want to be careful and There's a real danger of that. And that's why you have to repeat several times that we want to be careful in making our choice. The whole point to listen to an expert talk about different things is so that we can make a good choice. So again, that is something that was repeated many times that added no value whatsoever. So that would be another example of empty words. All meaning nothing, adding no value. And I began to realize that this particular presenter had this habit of filling out whatever he wanted to say with a lot of these extra words that mean nothing. So rather than to say, you're going to make a choice, he'll say something like, you're going to want to go ahead and make a choice. Well, there's a lot of wasted words there that add no meaning to it. So once you become familiar with these basic ideas in the Tao, I think you also begin to notice in everyday communication how some people do it well, naturally in accordance with the Tao, and a lot of people just don't. And this is also a good thing to keep in mind, so that you can watch yourself expressing what you want to say to other people. Watch yourself for wasted words that contribute no additional meaning, that add no particular value to the conversation, and stick to the more substantial. So strong winds could just be empty words. Now, at a higher strength of power, there's also complaints and negativity. So the blowing hot air could just be that, complaints, expressing negative thoughts and negative opinions about different things that are happening. And the problem with complaints is that complaining gives the illusion of solving a problem by the pretension that we're paying attention to it, because we're complaining and hearing the complaints. In actuality, complaints are usually done as a substitute of actually doing something to solve a problem. And that is the reason why Tao cultivators are very careful in watching themselves to see if they themselves complain too much. And they want to reduce and ideally even completely do without complaints. And lastly, at the highest level of strength, the strong winds represent pompous and pretentious words. So we do see this quite a bit as well, perhaps in speeches that people give, perhaps in talks given by politicians. They are really good at using pompous and pretentious words. So the bottom line is that in nature, we can see that strong winds don't last. Even when it's a storm, the winds will die down sooner or later. We know this to be a fact. We have experienced this, all of us, at one point or another. We have seen this many times. So taking a cue from this, we become mindful of our communication with other people. So we want to avoid blowing hot air with the 4 levels of strength that you see in this slide. All right, so to be even more specific, here's what Tao cultivators do. Tao cultivators would never monopolize a conversation, will always give the courtesy to other people, give them plenty of time to express themselves completely. So do keep in mind that just because Tao cultivators watch themselves to speak on the point and not waste a lot of words, that's no guarantee at all that other people will give you the same courtesy. You give others the courtesy of letting them speak. They may not give you the courtesy of letting you speak or giving you sufficient time to fully express the points that you need to express. So, nevertheless, in the Tao practice, it's not about what other people do It's about what you do. So that is why Dao cultivators will always give other people plenty of time to speak and wait patiently until they're done. Maybe they are the strong wind that blow for way too long than they need to. That's okay. Recognizing this fact and knowing that we're never going to change anyone but ourselves, Dao cultivators have the presence of mind, the composure and patience to sit out strong winds. So that's number one. Number two is that Dao cultivators always require themselves to speak in substantial, realistic, and practical terms. No empty promises. Elsewhere in the Tao Te Ching, it says that promises that are lightly made are also easily broken. So a real cultivator of the Tao will not be making empty promises, but whatever promise he or she makes is something that you can absolutely rely upon. Number three, specifically, Tao cultivators seek to minimize any complaints of negative expressions. Ideally, do without completely. They want to stick to the positive or the neutral. And I want to talk a little bit more about this later on in our as we discuss this particular chapter. And number four, rather than to grandstand, rather than to speak in a pompous way, Tao cultivators speak plainly with a humble yet confident demeanor. No grandstanding, no lecturing other people. Oftentimes, we see people lecture others, without specifically being invited or asked to do so. And we know that this is usually a manifestation of ego that's growing out of control. Now, that's pretty much it for 飘风, the strong winds. Let's cover the other term that we also see here. If you take a look at line 3 in the slide, sudden rain is coming up next. 骤雨. So let's talk about that. There's the pinyin. So remember, wherever it says OU here, that's always the O sound. It's not the L sound. So looking at this, if you say zao, that would actually be wrong. It's 骤. Yu is rain. So these two terms are similar to 飘风 in that yu, rain, the second character there, that's still commonly used in modern Mandarin. People use it all the time. When it rains, 下雨. But the adjective here is no longer used in modern Mandarin. It's used in ancient times. So let's dig into the meaning. The surface meaning, sudden rain, unexpected shower that catches you outdoors. So usually just by observing nature, we know that sudden rains, they may come suddenly, but they may end just as quickly. They don't last all day. So the deeper meaning of that is also related to human communication. It means the sudden, rude interruption in conversation. So just like we all see people who grandstand and lecture and speak in a pompous way and speak at length, they keep talking, they can't shut up, they don't stop. We see that all the time. We also see this all the time. We see people, when they don't understand the Tao and don't know that they should follow the Tao and emulate nature, they interrupt other people all the time. They cut other people off. For instance, ask a question, but not let the other side finish answering. Even before they're done, halfway through their answer, you cut them off and talk about something else. You dismiss their point even before they are done making that point. You bring up another point, a tangential argument, or you move on to the next question. So if you take some of the political talk shows, you find this behavior quite a bit. And usually the host of a talk show will treat the other party from the opposing side in that rude, inconsiderate manner that they'll ask a question, they're trying to present a tough exterior. I'm asking all the tough questions, but then before the other side answers, they cut them off, which means that the interrupting side is not really interested in having a dialogue. They want to grandstand in a different form, in a format that looks like Q&A, but it's actually really a speech. So we human beings do this a lot, especially those of us who have little or no understanding of the Tao. Our communication is contrary to the Tao. So next, Lao Tzu is going to make the point that, well, nature doesn't do that. We shouldn't do that either. And so he uses 3 lines to make that point. So line 4 says, what makes it so? Heaven and earth. So let's break it down. Let's unpack it. Why is it that strong winds and sudden rains never last? What is responsible for the way they are? And here we want to bring in heaven and earth, which is not some kind of deity. It's not some kind of supreme being. So the fact that strong winds never last and sudden rains never last is not because there's a divine decree from some sort of supreme being of the universe. It never was that. It's all it is just nature itself. It's heaven and earth, which is equal to nature, which is equal to the Tao. It's the way things are. The way things are is what is natural. The way things are is the Tao itself. So what we know about heaven and earth and nature, or the Tao, is that it's very powerful. So let's take a look at the next line. Even heaven and earth cannot make it last. And let's analyze that. The power of heaven and earth, nature, the Tao, is vast, possibly unlimited, infinitely powerful, and certainly greater than ours, greater than the powers that are at our command. We have a certain amount of power. Sometimes we can affect nature, but overall, we're still nothing compared to the power of the cosmos. So the Tao is powerful, nature is powerful, heaven and earth extremely powerful, but even that power is not enough to keep wind and rain going indefinitely. They have to stop at some point. So the same is true for human beings. None of us, I mean, there's a lot of people. We have all seen many people who are long-winded, but even they cannot keep it up indefinitely. It just, at some point, they will get tired, they will get hungry, or the audience will disappear. So there's no point for them to talk anymore. So they're going to have to go home and get some rest. So they can't keep it going forever either. So let's talk about human beings. We're puny compared to the vastness of heaven and earth. So we certainly cannot keep our wind and rain going forever. And that's metaphorical stand-in for our communication. Indeed, to be congruent with the Tao, to be in alignment with the Tao, we want to go in the opposite direction. We want to keep everything brief. So keeping it going forever would be opposed to the Tao, cannot be done, it's impossible, and even attempting to pad out the amount of your communication would also be going against the Tao. That is, whatever you can say in 1 minute, if you stretch it out to 5 minutes, that's against the Tao too. Whatever you can say with 1 sentence, if you make a whole paragraph out of it, an entire page in a book, even that is going against the Tao. So we see many examples in daily life. This is what Lao Tzu is talking about. It's all about daily life. We've all seen long speeches that bore everyone to tears, right? In fact, we see that probably way too often, and it's always about ego gratification. And we have also seen when people get into a heated debate, what they will call a heated discussion, what I would call an argument, there's usually this going on. There's usually the refusal to let the other side get in a word edgewise. You just want to keep talking and talking and talking to shut the other guy down. That's also not in accordance with the Tao. And lastly, we have also seen examples where people do the oversharing, like too much information. You know, there's gonna be times as you're interacting, talking to people, when inwardly you're gonna be thinking, okay, that's more than I need to know. I don't actually need that information. Thank you for sharing, but you are oversharing. So that happens all the time too. So this is all different ways to talk about how most human beings are, in fact, not practicing the Tao, not knowing what the Tao should be. So so they can modify their behavior. They can change the way they communicate. So here I have a humorous example of too much information. This comes from the UK. There's a local newspaper called Manx Independent. So they put out this notice. The text is pretty tiny. I hope everyone has enough resolution to be able to see it. The sign says, "Man fined after having poo in pub." That's the announcement. That's the update. And, you know, thanks a lot, guys. I don't actually need to know that. That's way too much information. Thank you for sharing, but that's definitely oversharing. All right, so I want to summarize what we have discussed so far into the Tao of expression. So there are several points about the Tao cultivator, and I realize that there's a certain amount of reiteration here as well, and that's because it's important. So Tao cultivator understands ego manifestations. A lot of times it manifests as talking too much. The Tao cultivator also understands how manifestations of the ego show the opposite of what is often intended. Let me give you an example. A lot of times people talk too much. And what they want to do is they actually want to display how much they know. But when they talk too much, everyone else will take it as a sign that they know too little. So the people that actually know a lot don't have to say that much to convey the idea, to let other people know about the extent of their knowledge. Those who just keep on talking, everyone knows that they don't know enough. Everyone can tell that they don't know enough. So this is the opposite of what they probably want. And the other one, the cutting people off, the interruption, the being rude, well, it's a sign of desperation. Let's just admit it. Whenever we see people who rudely interrupt others, we definitely get the sense of their desperation. Desperate to make a point, desperate not to lose an argument, desperate to look ignorant, all kinds of different desperation, desperate thoughts going on as they interrupt. The Tao cultivator also wants to be different from most people. Not only do they understand ego manifestations and see the downfall of that, they want to be different from most people. They want to be courteous. That courtesy they extend to others is not because of other people being courteous, but in spite of other people not being courteous. So they want to be different because they know that most people usually do talk too much. So the more you study the Tao, the more you see that this is the case. People really waste a lot of time and effort in speaking way too many words than they need to. And the second bullet point there, constant interruptions in conversations are epidemic. Well, perhaps I shouldn't say we, I'll just say I see this all the time. It's an epidemic. So perhaps part of it is because we live in the West, and this is a culture where that puts a big premium on talking. Think about how our government, our system, of politics is generally dominated by lawyers and attorneys. They are the talkers in the world. Number 3, Tao cultivators are the opposite of the talkers in that they feel perfectly comfortable with silence. So this is not something that's usually seen in society, especially here in the West. If you think about how most people are, they're pretty uncomfortable. They're the opposite. They're pretty uncomfortable with silence. Whenever there is a period of silence, when they're with other people, they become irritated. They feel like they have to say something to fill out the silence. In fact, let's just be perfectly honest and frank. A lot of times, probably you and I have felt the same thing, that, this silence is so awkward. I should say something, fill it out with some sounds so it wouldn't be as awkward. Now, to cultivate the Tao is to be the opposite. To cultivate the Tao is to be very comfortable when there's silence. So a Tao cultivator, when spending time with friends, if there's a moment of silence, there's a period when nobody says anything, that's totally fine. The Tao cultivator can enjoy the silent companionship with friends. And there is a lot that can be expressed even in the silence. There's a lot that you can tell from body language, expression, actions, what people do instead of what they say. And then one more, well, maybe a couple more. There's a strong preference in a Tao cultivator to listen instead of talk, rather than to project, receive, because this way you understand more, you'll learn more. And then lastly, this is an important point that we'll get into in just a moment. Lastly, a Tao cultivator refrains from complaining, criticizing, or gossiping. So these 5 points I will present to you as the Tao of expression. They're, in my experience, not that easy. Most people will fall into their habits of wanting to talk a lot, wanting to fill out moments of silence with sounds, with words. People even interrupt other people all the time, and perhaps there are some of us that do the same. And there are certainly those among us that prefer to talk more than listen. And let's face it, a lot of us complain like way too much, like all the time. Now, let me make one last point and then we'll take a break. If you encounter someone who says, yeah, I probably complain too much, that's actually someone who's halfway there to the level of a Tao cultivator. The reason why I say that is because almost everyone complains all the time, but only some of them, only a minority of them become aware of it. The vast majority of the people, you know, the author of the book, The Complaint-Free World, he said once upon a time that complaints are sort of like bad breath. How is that? Well, he says, you notice it in other people. You notice other people complaining, just like you notice the halitosis, the bad breath that other people have, but you don't notice it in yourself. You're not aware of it in yourself. Most people are not that self-aware, that they're complaining all the time, but they don't know it. So that's an important point, actually, that we need to dig into. It underlines the importance of Tao cultivation, having the right habits to help you on your path leading to success in Tao cultivation. So let's go ahead and take our mid-meeting 5-minute break. So the last point on this slide is about complaining, criticizing, and gossiping. And what I wanted to say was that people mostly are not aware of how much they complain and when they're complaining. So in Tao cultivation, I have found it to be very useful to look into this particular book, The Complaint-Free World. This book from Will Bowen that talks about a specific practice to attain, to create a complaint-free world for yourself. And there's so much more happiness and joy when you live in a world of positivity instead of the negativity of complaints. So this particular slide probably deserves a little more attention. To the left, you see the cover for A Complaint-Free World. Take the 21-day challenge. The 21-day challenge, the way it works is that there's a purple bracelet which you see on the cover of the book. That goes on the wrist. So the idea, it's a clever idea. The idea is that for 21 days, whenever you catch yourself complaining, you take the bracelet from one wrist and transfer that to the other wrist. And then you start over again. The goal is to reach 21 consecutive days, 3 weeks, 21 days of no complaints. When you have hit 21 days of continuous complaint-free days, you have accomplished the task. And people note that it's not as easy as it seems, that they habitually complain. They never realized that this was the case. But when they start doing this, they actually uncover a whole world of possibilities. There's an incredible power that comes over to them that it leads to so much more happiness. So that's what the book is all about. And there's a lot. There's a lot about the concept, the practice. So I also wanted to show you on the right-hand side the translation of the book into Mandarin. So this is the on the right-hand side is the cover for the Mandarin edition of the A Complaint-Free World. So, and let me break it down for you. So first of all, the first thing to notice is that the cover looks very different than the English original edition. that's actually not a big surprise. When foreign language publishers, publisher from a different country, negotiates for the publishing rights in a particular language from the original publisher, they usually do not also purchase the rights for the cover. And this is usually because they can recreate the cover much more easily using their own resources, their own designers, artists, graphics professionals to create their own covers. And that's why the cover looks so different. So they have to rework the cover anyway because it has to be in their target language. So the top 3 characters, the first character means no, and then the second and third characters there mean complaint. So no complaint. Then the characters below are apostrophe s and then world. So altogether, the 6 characters would be a literal translation, a good translation of the English title, A Complaint-Free World. So many books translated into Mandarin have very distorted titles that are nothing like the original or different in some ways from the original. So translating from English to Mandarin is just as troublesome and full of problems as translating from Chinese to English. And then the subtitle there, the small text that you see between the 6 big characters, it's basically saying globally, 80 countries and 6 million people have enthusiastically joined in this movement of spiritual happiness. So that's there's no corresponding subtitle from the original book. The original book has the subtitle, How to Stop Complaining and Start Enjoying the Life You Always Wanted. So the book designer in the Mandarin edition have chosen to go in a different direction on that. And then to the left-hand side of the Mandarin cover, you'll see more text intended for advertising. It starts with the name of the author, the name of the translator, and then it goes on to talk about how you can think positive, you can be distant, you can get further away from problems. So this can change your life if you take on the 21-day challenge and you can uncover this incredible divine power in your life. And then it goes on, but you get the idea. So this particular book, The Complaint-Free World, I actually recommend. And there's the original author, Will Bowen, he uses a joke to get people into this idea of the complaint-free world, and that joke incorporates a central idea of the Tao and Zen Buddhism. So I want to relate that to you. So Will Bowen, what the author says is that there's an old joke, and the point that he wants to illustrate is that we complain not to change things, but as an alternative to changing things. So he talks about 2 construction workers that they're buddies and they always have lunch together. So every day they sit down for lunch, and every day they bring out their lunchbox and they take out the food and they have their lunch together as friends. So one of them, every day when he takes out his packed lunch, he'll open it up and then discover that it's meatloaf sandwich. So, and he always says, meatloaf sandwich, another meatloaf sandwich? Oh, darn it. So this is, of course, heard by his friend. Now, day after day, every lunch, he is always unpacking his lunchbox, getting his sandwich out, and then Oh no, meatloaf sandwich, another one? So this went on until his colleague could no longer contain himself. So he said to his friend, listen, why don't you just tell your wife to make you something else? You know, something different from the meatloaf sandwich. So he's suggesting this, but the complaining coworker says, what are you talking about? I make my own lunch. So Will Bowen uses that little story to make the point that we're complaining a lot. We're complaining all the time, just like, oh no, meatloaf sandwich, but we're actually the ones creating the cause for complaint. We're packing our own lunch. We're making the meatball sandwich for ourselves. So what is the solution? Well, when you start this practice for 21 days to aim for 21 days, interesting things begin to happen. So first of all, people make the discovery that they are not the kind of people they think they are. And if I'm being honest with everyone, I would also have to be blunt. I would also have to confess that probably most of us are not the kind of people we think we are. We're like most other people out there. We think we're positive and upbeat. You hear this all the time. You hear people say, well, I'm someone who thinks the glass as half full and not half empty. Meaning, hey, everybody, I'm an optimist. Glass is half full. Okay, I'm a positive person. I'm always, cheerful. They think of themselves that way. But that is only because they do not realize how much negativity they carry around. When they actually start paying attention, they're surprised, even shocked about the amount of negativity they carry around. So this occurs when you begin with the bracelets. It's really, when you analyze it, it's really nothing more than a practice in mindfulness. Actually doing it, actually transferring the bracelet from one wrist to another, that's just an opportunity for your mind to recognize to itself that, I didn't think I complained that much, but I just complained. That was a complaint. And as you go through a day, transferring the bracelet from one wrist to the other, you begin to reflect that, wow, I actually complain way more than I thought. So this practice, even before reaching 21 days of consecutive days with no complaints, even just one day or even just 0 days, you're just spending your time transferring the bracelet from one wrist to the other, even just a little bit of that mindfulness is extremely helpful. It can change your life dramatically. So there's a correspondent who wrote to the original author, Will Bowen. He wrote, I have not yet made it to 21 consecutive days without complaining. He says, I seem to hit a wall around day 4 and I have to start over again. But then he says, but even with just 4 days, I have found that I'm already a much happier person. Is the bracelet supposed to do that? So the author, laughs about this when he relates it to his audience, when he talks about this topic, and he says, it's that mindfulness, it's that awareness of the amount that you complain. Even a little bit of it can change your life dramatically, can have a powerful effect on you, can make you much happier. Now, there are also people who say that, well, I think negative thoughts all the time, so I'm going to take it to the next level. Whenever I detect that I have a complaining thought, even if I don't say it, I will transfer it from one transfer the bracelet from one wrist to the other. And the author says, that's actually not necessary. It's actually the wrong way to go. So let me explain. There's no need to specifically try to change the way you think, even though you become aware of a lot of negativity and complaints in your thinking. That's because of the mind-body connection. It's a two-way connection. So if you just focus on what you say, when complaints come out, and then act on it, that seems like just a physical manifestation, but it'll change your mental self as well. Work on your expressions, the actual complaints that come out of your mouth, and your thoughts will follow. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it work. Okay, so back to the 道德经. Here, I am isolating characters. So previously, I talked about how the last part of this is a repeating pattern. The last 5 characters from line 7 is a corresponding pattern to the 5 characters in line 8 and line 9. So what I'm doing here is that I'm zooming in on 5 characters from the second character to the 6th character. So let me talk about that. There's a specific reason why I do this. So that translates to those who follow the Tao. So if you break down this particular translation, this line, the first character, gu, that's thus. And then the 5 characters are those who follow the Tao. And then the last 3 characters are with the Tao, quote unquote. So now I want to dig into this concept a little bit. Those who follow the Tao, who are they? So these are the people who can communicate in accordance with the Tao. So the meaning of that is the people who use words for the purpose of conveying information rather than to gratify the ego. Whenever you have people speaking in a pompous way, speaking too much, drawing attention to themselves, and if you remember from the previous chapter, flaunting, boasting, bragging about themselves, praising themselves, well, that's definitely not in accordance with the Tao. That is not to convey information, but to gratify the ego. So the person who calls himself a genius, is that to convey the information that he has a genius level intellect to others? No. Number 1 is to gratify his ego. And number 2, everyone knows that it's not true. Number 2, to communicate in accordance with the Tao is to get the point across without excess verbiage. When you get better at this, you become more and more adept at the art of expressing more with less. And by more, I'm talking about more meaning, more precision with less words. Number 3, those who follow the Tao, those who communicate in accordance with the Tao, are careful to remain positive and constructive rather than negative and critical. So a complaint-free world, the mindfulness practice embedded in that, it can be done in a variety of different ways. I do recommend the bracelet as a good life transformation, easy to do method. But there are other methods that can be just as effective. It's all about becoming aware. So those who follow the Tao keep themselves in that positive and constructive mindset. Lastly, for 1, 2, and 3, because we're talking about the Tao, it's important to do all of the above in a natural, unforced way. If you are able to do that, if you incorporate the above as part of your character, as just the way you are, then you can do all 3 without being reminded that you have to. In my experience, very few people can actually reach that pinnacle of cultivation, but it's a very worthy goal for all of us. As was as the point made by the gentleman who made it 4 days out of 21 days in the 21-day challenge, even a little bit of this practice can make a dramatic, huge difference in your life. So this is the people who follow the Tao. So let's go ahead and take a look at the people who follow the other 2 categories. So line 8 is about those who follow virtue. That's the corresponding virtue. That is, you may not be able to have this particular teaching as your second nature, that you can do it without thinking, but you practice it by practicing the virtue. You remind yourself that you have to be this way. And then let's talk about line 9. So there are 2 different interpretations here that I want to make sure everyone is aware of. The first one is as you see here, that this is the flip side. That is, this is the yin and yang. The loss, in this case, if you think of that as a negative thing, in a negative context, it means those who don't practice in accordance with, who don't practice the virtue to become more Tao-like. So those who go against the Tao and experience loss, that is, obstacles and setbacks in life. What is the other interpretation? The other interpretation is to think of loss as a positive thing, which is certainly true elsewhere in the Tao Te Ching. So loss in this case will be losing the excess in terms of excessive ego and excessive words, excessive pomposity, for instance. So I stick to the negative interpretation because that is what's being noted in the Mandarin language commentaries in my possession. And they're very consistent in that, but I do want to make sure you are aware of another possibility to interpret. So from this point on, I'll stick to the negative interpretation. Previously, I have shown everyone the source, the commentaries that I generally check with to make sure that I'm on the right track. So this is definitely a consistent interpretation from all of them. So it's a pretty important point, because the point is that you choose how you put this teaching into practice or not, as the case may be, and you end up with the corresponding result. If you get to the point where you can practice it as a natural part of you, you're with the Tao. If you can't quite do that, but you're practicing it every day as a virtue, then you are with the virtue. If you don't follow at all, then you are with loss. Excellent. Let's continue. So now I want to draw your attention to what you see here. What I'm doing with this slide is that I'm marking 7, 8, 9, and then also 10, 11, 12. So if you stick with just the English, then you can see definitely that these two are basically repetitions of one another. Those who follow the Tao are with the Tao. Those who follow virtue are with virtue. Those who follow laws are with laws. Those who are with the Tao is pleased to have them. Those who are with virtue, virtue is pleased to have them. Those who are with laws, laws is pleased to have them. So why the repetition? Well, we know from other chapters in the Tao Te Ching that Lao Tzu rarely reiterates a particular point, but there are other places where he definitely repeats the same point in different ways. And that's always done for emphasis, meaning here's something important, so I'm going to say it again. I'm going to tell you again so you will remember. So what I have done here to depict that is to line them up. As you can see here, we've got lines 10, 11, 12, and I'm highlighting the last part of it. You know, the Tao is also pleased to have them, etc. So all these I am placing together to properly talk about this character here. So if you take a look, this character is le. It means pleased or happy. And this is the third from last character. You can probably identify it quite easily from the line. It's repeating from 10 all the way down to 12. So let's dig into what this means. This is the part where it's where most people require a little bit of guidance to fully understand this part of 23. So we know for sure that the Tao is not a personified deity, so it can't actually have the emotion of happiness. Okay, no problem there. It's the same with virtue and loss. These are abstract concepts. They're not human-like entities, so they also cannot have the emotion of happiness. So why would virtue be pleased to have you if you are with virtue? What does this really mean? So I think you would agree that this requires a little bit more of an explanation. This goes back to the bottom line expressed by Lao Tzu, that following the Tao is completely up to the individual. You can follow a little bit, you can follow religiously, you can follow not at all. It's completely up to you. So because of that, in this context, le is like when we say, that's just fine. Let me be a little more specific. Let me explain what I mean by that's just fine. So here's how I can express it. Here's how I can explain. Whichever path you follow is just fine with the universe. Why? It's because the universe doesn't care. The Tao doesn't care. Existence doesn't care what choice you make. Reality doesn't care. It cannot care. The universe, existence, the Tao, reality, these are not entities that can care. And that's because you alone create the consequences for yourself. You alone affect your own destiny. So whether it's Tao or virtue or loss, whether you see a loss as positive or negative, the bottom line is that whatever path you follow, that's just fine. Nobody cares except you. You should care. You should care about the consequences that you create or generate for yourself. So that's important. So from the Tao perspective, from the perspective of the great Tao, there's no disappointment or sadness in the Tao. This is not like the concept of a God who is disappointed that you turn away from God. the Tao isn't disappointed or sad that you haven't done something it wants you to do, because it has no human wants and desires. It cannot be disappointed or sad any more than electricity can be disappointed or sad. Electricity is not disappointed, never sad. It just is. Same with the Tao. So the deity that can be disappointed and sad when you turn away from the deity, it can also punish. It can also punish human beings for turning away, sinning, eternal damnation. Now, we're living in this society, we're all very familiar with that concept. We're all very familiar with the concept of an all-knowing, omnipotent, omniscient deity that wants you to be good, is sad when you are not good, when you sin, and will mete out punishment. However, even though we're all familiar with that, most of us will not look a little bit deeper to realize the deep nonsense that is just at the bottom of that concept, that is just beneath the surface of that concept. If that particular deity is truly all-knowing, then that deity already knows whether you will or will not turn away and sin. So there should not be any surprise or disappointment or sadness. So the whole thing becomes like some ludicrous preordained script that everyone is just following. So the concept of the all-knowing deity is deeply flawed in its heart. Now, we don't need to get into that. Let's stick to the better, more rigorous, and more robust concept of the Tao. So first of all, what about punishment in the perspective of the Tao? The punishment of poor results comes not from the heavenly Tao, but from your own decisions or lack of decisions. You generate that yourself too. So the great results that you get in life, that's from a good decision that you have made. And that decision is good to you only by your own reckoning, not to some external third party. The bad result that you get, that's generated by your own bad decision, and that decision is bad by your own reckoning, by your own measurement, in your own perspective. So you alone enjoy the result or suffer the negativity of the punishment. At the end of the day, it's only you. You're it. You have to take responsibility. So now that we have gotten that out of the way, we can now put everything together in a mini summary slide. So upon hearing Tao teachings, there are possibilities that can occur. Some will practice the teachings, will not practice the teachings at all, or practice them sporadically, sometimes on, sometimes off. When that is the case, they follow the path of loss, as in losing the teachings. So what will eventually happen is that this leads to you having to repeat the lesson. And that's going to happen one way or the other. These life lessons are not optional. You have to pass them, or you cannot go forward. That's just the way it is. Now, some will put the teachings into daily practice. So this is the path of virtue. It means you conscientiously practice the virtue all the time. This will eventually lead to Dao, the natural integration of skills, the effortless excellence in execution. So those are the 3 levels that you lay out. It becomes easy when you see it from the bottom up, from laws to virtue to the Tao. And this is probably the reason why all the commentaries that I have seen on this chapter is basically pointing to laws as a negative thing rather than the positive kind of laws, as in losing clutter, losing excess, etc. All right, so let's take a look at the very last line. So here, what I have done from line 13 is to isolate this character, xin. The pinyin is xin, and it sounds like shin. The x is sh. The meaning is believe, trust, or faith. So the previous 6 lines, we have seen reiteration from loss to virtue to Tao, or if you look at it the other way, Tao, virtue, and loss. And that's repeated. Those 3 lines are repeated 1 time for a total of 6 lines. So the previous 6 lines talk about you having the power to choose your own path. This line sums them up with the final point that you must trust the process of the Tao or have faith in it. So to see why that is, well, when you pick up this particular teaching as a virtue that you practice, when you're practicing all the time, the discipline creates positive habits for you. Now, whenever I talk about creating habits, practicing all the time, diligence, discipline, I know that I always encounter objections and oppositions. That is, people will say, why do I have to do that? That's like a lot of work. That's entirely due to the poor translations and distortions in the West. And the objection sounds like, that's a lot of work, but I thought there's no strife in the Tao, right? You talk about that, Derek. You say there's no strife in the Tao. Why do I have to have discipline and, practice all the time? That's a lot of work. So let me explain about the distortions in the West. This, for me, this goes back several decades. Back in the 80s and 90s, I was introduced by a friend of mine to the self-improvement movement, and I came across many different teachers. Many of these teachers definitely gave the impression that good things will come to you through thoughts alone. This includes teachings like positive thinking, creative visualization, the law of attraction. They all fall into this category. So what happened is that the people that I encountered, some of them have gotten great results from these teachings, and a lot of them, including the friend who brought me into it, have not. So what was the difference? Well, the difference was that some of the people, a minority, some of the people were so energized by these teachings that it naturally led them to action. They took action on it. When they took action on it, whether it came out of positive thinking or creative visualization or the law of attraction, when they took action on it, they eventually got what they wanted. And they felt that it was a powerful vindication of the teachings. But there were more people that did not follow the teachings that way. They were all under the impression that all they had to do was just to think differently, and good things will happen to them as a result of that thinking. I eventually came upon the conclusion, after having observed enough of them, that if your thoughts fail to energize yourself into action, they will also fail to energize the universe. That is, the universe will not take action on your behalf if you decide to not take action yourself. So that in a way, there's a mirror relationship between the universe and you, that it reflects you and you reflect the universe. So if those ideas did not get you to take action, the universe will also not take action on your behalf, and therefore good things will not occur, will simply not occur. Another category of the teachings that I came across offer to do a service to take on the burden for you. So the way that this happens varies. So some of them will offer like a spiritual audit. By virtue of going through the spiritual audit, after paying a fee for that, it is said that you will clear up, that you will naturally have good things happen to you in life. It reminded me of another fad that I had seen a long time ago, the weight loss massage. If you haven't seen it, it's only because it failed very quickly and went nowhere. What it was that for a short time, people were all going to these special therapists. They have the special weight loss oil, this ointment that they will rub on your belly, which they will then proceed to massage. So after like a half hour to an hour session, that magical weight loss ointment has been massaged into your flesh, and you will naturally burn off fat. So it appealed for a short time to the people seeking that, because the idea is that they didn't have to do anything. They just lie there and allow the therapist to work on them. They didn't need to sweat and grunt and exert themselves in the gym. So it was very appealing. Now, they ended up with no results at all, as is usually the case with this kind of quick cure. Some of them will report initial positive results. Hey, I lost 2 pounds, I lost 3 pounds. But invariably, they discover that it really doesn't work, that the initial success was pretty much just in the mind. So it was the same with the self-improvement movement. A lot of it was like the weight loss massage for spirituality. So in one particular group, they even say that a major problem with cultivating spirituality today is the lack of time. They have solved that problem for you. They have taken on the burden of resolving that issue, because they have a spiritual leader who will magically implant a dharmic wheel in you, a metaphysical wheel that will spin all the time. The spinning of the dharmic wheel is the cultivation that you will do 24/7. It never stops spinning. And this solves the problem of a lack of time, because no matter what you're doing, whether you are at work or at play, that dharmic wheel is spinning, 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 accumulating merits for you spiritually. Okay, well, that also doesn't work. It's not a whole lot different than temples that accept donations to pray on your behalf. Unless you are doing the action yourself, unless you are making a meaningful change in your life, it's just contrary to the Tao. So these scams work. They worked previously. Some of them continue to work for specific reasons. One, because we human beings just love wishful thinking or magical thinking. We want to get something for nothing. We want to get everything for no effort. Number two, they work because when they don't work, people blame themselves instead of the scam. Like, well, I'm not getting any progress because I haven't followed the teachings correctly. Well, I'm not thinking properly in my visualization exercise. People blame themselves. They don't think about the fact that these are scams to begin with. So they weren't supposed to get any results except in their minds. Lastly, selective memory. People remember the isolated successes that they've had. They forget about all the times when it just didn't work. So to them, recollection later on is very imperfect. They think they've had outstanding success in life because they forget about all the failures. So all of this is contrary to the Tao. None of this is what Laozi is talking about. Important point for me to make. So just as a reminder, if you come across a New Age guru who tries to convince followers that they can have whatever they want with no effort, be especially wary. It's a scam. So as far as diligence and discipline and practice, the actual authentic teachings of the Tao will tell you that constant practice is not the same as strife. To see why, it's actually very simple. Once a habit is formed, and when I say entrenched, I mean that you have practiced it so much, it's become second nature, the neural pathways have become entrenched. It's like autopilot for your life. You don't have to think about it. You will continue to reap self-enforcing benefits. It's actually a whole lot better than the dharmic wheel that's spinning all the time. The reason why it's better is because the dharmic wheel is imaginary. It doesn't actually exist. But the habits that you have invested the effort to form, to create and form, properly entrenched, it's there. It's a pattern that you will automatically follow. So like the dharmic wheel, only it's real and works a whole lot better. In fact, not only is it something that works, it's also quite enjoyable. There's no strife, there's no strain, there's no struggle. And the same approach is applied to everything in life. This is the secret of the Tao cultivators of effortless excellence. So what I'm trying to say is that the power to make this happen is within every single one of us. And that brings to mind a story called The Pearl. Once upon a time in ancient China, there was a beggar. He spent his days walking the streets. He's begging for spare change until one day he encountered a wealthy man. And the wealthy man, for whatever reason, decided to help the beggar. So the wealthy man could tell the beggar was hungry, naturally. So he said, "Follow me." He said, "I shall treat you to a meal at my mansion." So they got to his mansion. The wealthy man ordered his chef to prepare a meal just as he would for any of his visiting friends. So the two of them, the wealthy man and the beggar, they ate quite well and they drank a lot of wine. The beggar had too much to drink and fell asleep. His stomach full of food, felt sleepy, he drifted off. The wealthy man observed the beggar sleeping and thought, the help that this man really needs is not the meal, but what he really needs is a way to get back on his feet financially. So he selected from among his possessions an extremely valuable pearl. So he wanted to be kind to this beggar. He wanted to do a great favor for him, but he didn't want it to be obvious. So he slipped the pearl into the beggar's left coat pocket. So the wealthy man thought to himself, there's no need for me to tell him I'm giving this to him. I don't want him to keep thanking me, you know? So I would rather for him to just discover the pearl on his own. And that way he can use it to reestablish himself, maybe start a business using the pearl as investment, and leave the begging life far behind. So much later, the beggar woke up, thanked the wealthy man, and took his leave. So the wealthy man said goodbye to him, wished him luck, and that was the last time they saw each other for 3 years. 3 years passed, and then one day, the wealthy man got the news that there was someone at the front door, a visitor, asking for him. So the wealthy man was surprised that after 3 years, it was the beggar again at his door. So he was thinking, perhaps he has succeeded, and now he's coming back to thank me properly, to tell me all about what he had gone through. But then he was shocked when he saw that the beggar seemed worse off than before. Not better, not successful, even worse off. So out of that surprise and shock, the wealthy man said, what happened to you? What happened to you since the last time, 3 years ago, that I saw you? The beggar shrugged. He's like, well, pretty much the same thing before I met you, sir. I begged on the streets every day. The last 3 years, it's been pretty hard, but, I managed to survive. So this is not what the wealthy man wanted to hear. He thought, okay, maybe the beggar started his business with the pearl as investment, but was not able to make it successful. But now it sounded like the beggar did not start anything at all. So he grabbed the beggar by the shoulder and said, what about the pearl? What about the pearl? What did you do with it? The beggar said, what pearl? He seemed completely baffled. The wealthy man could tell the beggar really did not understand. So he calmed down and explained what he had done. He pointed to the left pocket in the beggar's coat. It was the same coat. The beggar said, that pocket? You put a pearl in that pocket? Well, I never use it since I never have anything to put in it. So he reached in and felt something. He took it out, and there it was, the pearl that the wealthy man gave him that had been there all 3 years of his begging life. That's the story of the pearl. And as you can probably guess, this story is not really about the beggar in ancient China. It's about all of us. Not in ancient times, but here and now. The pearl is not the pearl. The pearl is the divine spark of the Tao inside of you. It's something that was given to you that you've always had. It's unlimited. It's a power that hides in your heart, just like the pearl was hiding in the pocket of the beggar. So the beggar never checked that pocket, just like most people never look within them to discover the Tao on the inside that they can use for everything. So that pearl within you is the power to choose. It's the power to pick either loss or virtue or the Tao. And the result that you get will correspond with whatever choice you make. So that is the story that I would like to end with today. And What I want to do now is to move to the summary to make sure that we crystallize the concepts that we have gone over from 23. Concept number 1, emulate nature in your communications. Notice how weather comes and goes. So learn from that and be mindful of your communication. Align it to the characteristics of the Tao that we have discussed. Concept number 2, the Tao within. Remember the pearl. You are sovereign. You choose your own path. There's no need to look to an external supernatural power. You are the supernatural power. Every Sunday, today is a Sunday, every Sunday people go to church to hear about some external almighty power. And I'm telling you right now, you are that almighty power. You have it within you all along, just like the beggar had the pearl in his pocket all along. 3, have faith. Have faith in yourself. Have faith in everything. Because the universe, existence itself, the Tao, they have faith in you to the exact same extent that you have faith in it. It's just you. You have the pearl. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.